Hello and welcome back to the Power Builder Fundamentals self-guided course. In Lab 14 within Unit 14, let's have a look at the lab setup. We're going to run the demo application, the solution showing the customer search window to show you exactly what you're going to build in this lab. At the end of Lab 14, you'll be able to actually see the data interface, but no data yet coming from the database because we haven't finished that part of the puzzle. In this lab, however, you're going to build the viewing area for the data. That is the user interface for the application side of the logic. Think about what painter you need for building the Ancestor data window control. Also, where will you get help on writing the code to open the customer search window as an MDI child, also known as sheet, within the MDI frame. So let's look at the Power Builder IDE here. We're actually going to use the jogger to run the easy order sample solution. You notice after the login window, we're going to be presented with an MDI frame. On the frame, we'll be able to actually click on the toolbar, search for customers, and this is where you'll be at the end of Lab 14. You'll have some objects on the top of the MDI child window, which is the customer search window, to be able to enter the customer ID and the name, and you'll have a command button to actually allow the user to initiate when they require the search to begin. The rest of the window below the search button is the data window control. And of course, inside of that will be a data window object, so you'll be able to see the headings like company name, ID, first name, etc. on the header, and then on the bottom, a total count with a line drawn across the bottom in the footer. That's all you'll be able to see at this point. But you should be able to open the window. You should be able to also close the window as well. If you open the window, you should notice that the window name is tracked under the window pull-down menu, which will be the second from the right-hand side pull-down menu. That's the kind of behavior that we're looking for the percentage of the application completion at this point in time. So let's look at the window hierarchy. In previous units, we've created a base Ancestor window called WANC, and from that we inherited the working frame, WFrame, which we're currently opening inside the easy order application. We've also created an abstract level window called WSheet, and that's going to be a window that'll pass along behavior to all MDI child or sheet windows within our application. And we're going to build the customer search window in this particular lab with the data window object and the data window control. And we're going to attach that to WFrame. So before you begin, I just wanted to pass along a couple of hints and tidbits before you begin Lab 14. First of all, let's look at the demo window that I used in the previous unit. You'll see here that the data window control, DW1, is inherited from the system class. You can see that in the properties dialog. And of course, we don't want that. Also, the data window control has DW1, and maybe I'd like to change the naming convention for that. So here's another tip. Go to the design options, have a look at the actual prefixes, and you'll be able to see in the prefix that when you look around, this is the prefix that Power Builder IDE uses when it builds a data window control. If you don't want DW, for example, I personally like the prefix DC for data window control, then you can change it here, and every time you add a data window control to a working window, the prefix will read DC, not DW. And then it'll put an underscore 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., where you can replace the numeric value with a more meaningful name. So if you don't like the naming conventions that come with Power Builder out of the box when you install it, this is where you can actually change the control prefixes. So look all the way through here for command buttons, for example, checkboxes, radio buttons, picture controls, and all the other controls that you may add to the surface of the window. And if you don't like the prefix, you can basically change it here. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to build an Ancestor for all the data window controls. That has to be a standard visual, of course. And notice that we have the ability to inherit from the data window control inside the system class. And then we can save that. For example, a user object for data window control. Now don't worry about filling in the properties or writing scripts at this point. Just make sure that you have it and use it when you build your application. Remember that this will form the Ancestor for all the data window controls, and you can go back and add that later. From our previous demo, however, you'll notice that DW1 was inherited from now the system class, not my user object that I just created. So one of the things I could do, of course, is I could delete the data window control. However, I would lose all the scripts at that point. So if you don't have any scripts, it's not a big deal. However, what happens if you have a ton of scripts? You want to lose that logic at this point. Here's a neat little trick. So I'm going to close the window painter here, and I'm going to use the right-hand mouse button, and I'm going to actually edit the source of the window. And you'll see here that DW1 is inherited from data window. Basically go through the source, and I hit the replace button here on the toolbar, and I replace the word data window with what I call my user object UDC. And what I like to do, for example, is to use the find and make sure that I replace it. So you see now in the source code, DW1 has been changed from inheriting it from the data window object in the system class to inheriting from UDC. So I'm just going to close this painter now, save the changes, and I'm going to open WDemo. And you'll notice here when I click on the data window, DW1 is inherited from the user object UDC. And of course, at this point, I can also change the data window control. For example, in your case, DC customer, or whatever makes logical sense. So there's a neat little tip that when you've actually got a object or a control on the surface of the window, you definitely have a user object, which is the ancestor you'd like to use, but the previous programmer didn't do that, or you forgot to use the user object. So you've built something and now you want to basically just change the pointer to the ancestor. You can do that by using the right-hand mouse button and editing the source code. I would strongly suggest before you do that to make a backup, because if you mess up the source code, you may not be able to open and work with the object in the near future. So you notice in Lab 14 that we need to take the menu M Sheet and we need to create a new window called W Customer Search and attach that menu to it. We're going to add a data window control to it and attach to the data window control a data window that we've already built called D Customer Search. So for the lab debriefing, what is the data window control base class? Does a data window object have a base class? Where did you build the data window concrete class? Review the code on how to resize the data window control. Review setting the data window control properties. Remember to scroll through all the properties and look at the various tab pages. The data window control and the associated data window object is quite complex. Before doing the self-assessment, if you haven't done so now, please complete Lab 14. When you've completed the lab, please get ready to test your knowledge of both Unit 14 and Lab 14 materials that you just covered. Congratulations, you've completed Lab 14. Please click the link in the center of the screen to proceed to the next unit.